and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Django Reinhardt, his life and times and best hits. So Django Reinhardt was one of the earliest jazz legends hailing from Europe. He was born into a gypsy family in France in the early 19s, which spurned his nickname of the Gypsy Legend in later years. By the time he was 15, he was playing music professionally. In 1934, he formed his first band, the Quintette du Hot Club de France, alongside violin virtuoso Stéphane Grappelli. He was one of the first jazz musicians to play the guitar as a lead instrument in a jazz ensemble. His style of guitar playing was influenced by Romanian folk music and pioneered a new style of music called gypsy jazz. This style fuses the vibrance of Romanian music with the bouncy rhythms of swing music, producing a sound that's infectious and exotic. In 1946, he toured the US for a while alongside the Duke Ellington Orchestra. He left a legacy as one of the greatest guitarists of all time. He was also an avid composer. He wrote nearly 100 songs. His playing style influenced several other jazz legends of his time, including Charlie Bird, Wes Montgomery, and more. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Django Reinhardt, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. So Django Reinhardt was a jazz musician hailing from Belgium. He was one of the pioneers of gypsy jazz along with other gypsy musicians. He was originally called Jean, and his mother, after Belgian customs at the time, changed his name to Django. He suffered an injury early on in his career that caused him to lose 2 fingers, and that dramatically changed his playing style. He went on to found the Quintette du Hot Club de France, widely regarded as one of the most innovative jazz ensembles in the history of France. So Django Reinhardt was born into a Belgian family of gypsies in 1910. He learned to play the violin and the guitar at an early age. His family was also musical, and they inspired him to take up music full-time. He would tour in concert halls and nightclubs in Paris, and he was largely self-taught. Most of his inspirations came from his fellow bandmate Stéphane Grappelli. When he was 18, he was injured in a caravan fire that claimed 2 fingers from his head. He had returned home from a performance one night when he accidentally knocked over a candle, setting his caravan on fire. He survived but suffered the loss of 2 of his fingers. Doctors believed he wouldn't be able to play the guitar again, but he recovered, and his disability gave him a surprising edge in his guitar playing. And with time and rehabilitation, he recovered his playing style in a completely new way, using only 2 fingers to play his guitar. After a while, he resumed his playing in cafes in Paris. In 1934, Reinhardt alongside Stéphane Grappelli came up with the idea of starting a music band of their own. So they founded the Quintette du Hot Club de France group, with Reinhardt's brother Joseph and Roger Chapat on guitar and Louis Vola on double bass. The group had no percussion section and became famous as one of the few jazz ensembles with only string instrumentals. The first singer to sing alongside them was Jean Sablon. He went on to collaborate with them on more than 30 recordings. Another guest vocalist was Freddie Taylor. He famously participated on songs like Georgia on My Mind and Nagasaki. The quintet signed up with Decca Records, NMW Records and Ultraphone Records in later years, resulting in long-lasting success. Django was an avid composer. He wrote more than 100 songs of his own, from beautiful ballads like Nuages and Daphne to swinging songs like Swing 42. Many of his compositions went on to become jazz classics. He also collaborated with several other jazz legends at the time, from Louis Armstrong to Coleman Hawkins to Dizzy Gillespie. In 1939, the beginning of World War II caused the Hot Club Quintet to disband. Grappelli remained in London and Reinhardt left for France. In Paris, he led another band with Hubert Rosting replacing Grappelli on violin. In 1946, he toured alongside Duke Ellington's orchestra playing electric guitar. In his early years, he was more into swing music, and his music with the electric guitar was infused with bop. In his later years, he would mingle both styles of playing, notably in reunion concerts alongside his previous bandmate Stéphane Grappelli. In the 50s, he withdrew from music, playing only occasionally. He died in 1953, leaving behind a legacy as one of the greatest guitarists in jazz. So that was some insight into the biography and best hits of Django Reinhardt, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Django Reinhardt, his life and times and best hits. Now it's time for some trending album news. Lizzie Thomas is an acclaimed jazz vocalist hailing from Pittsburgh, and she's out with a new album for the Christmas season called This Christmas. The album blends jazz, neo-soul and R&B into an exciting compilation of holiday classics. The album's up for release on Dot Time Records and features John DiMartino on piano, Wayne Escoffery on saxophone, Desron Douglas on bass and more. Highlights of the album include a bossa nova guitar rendition of Christmas Time Is Here, It's Magic featuring a flugelhorn melody, and the entire ensemble come together on the Paul McCartney classic Wonderful Christmas. Star of Wonder is played out as a soulful piano and drum song. So this album is sure to bring some great Christmas vibes to this season. For more information, please visit www.lizziethejazzsinger.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Django Reinhardt's best albums of all time. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Django Reinhardt, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour. The first album is called Peke a la Mouche. The music was inspired by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie music. They're basically the same bebop theme songs, but Django transforms them into something more lyrical and refined. Gypsy Jazz was released in 1994. This album contains a mix of his compositions and jazz standards like Swing 41, Nuages, Night and Day and more. There's an album compilation called 4 Classic Albums Plus from 2011. They constitute some of Django's best works of all time. The first CD compilation features his performances with the Quintette du Hot Club de France. The second half of the album is taken from 1934 through 1940 and sees Reinhardt performing alongside his original quintet and other musicians. So this album is a great cross-section of his best works in different settings throughout his career. And an album called Keep Cool, Guitar Solos 1950-53, towards the last years of his career he switched from his typical swing style to a more bebop oriented approach. So most of the tracks here included his own compositions and have a touch of bebop in them. So that's a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that, stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Django Reinhardt, his life and times and best hits. And during this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called Peke a la Mouche. This album was recorded towards the end of Django's career. There's 2 CDs in this album, one from a recording session from 1947 and another from 1953. The music was inspired by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie music. They're basically the same bebop themed songs, but Django transforms them into something more lyrical and refined. Unlike most of his albums, his violin collaborator Stefan Grappelli is missing on these tracks. He's complemented by drums, clarinet and trumpet on the album. Gypsy Jazz was released in 1994. This album compilation features Reinhardt in the post-war years when he switched from acoustic to electric guitar. There are 6 songs taken from 1947 quintet performances. The bandmates consistently change, but Django dominates the music and is in fine form. There's 8 tracks on which we see Django supplemented by a piano, bass and drums trio. And this one's from a live performance in 1953. The album contains a mix of his compositions and jazz standards like Swing 41, Nuages, Night and Day and more. There's an album compilation called 4 Classic Albums Plus from 2011. They constitute some of Django's best works of all time. The first CD compilation features his performances with the Quintette du Hot Club de France, which saw him collaborating alongside the rhythm section of 2 guitars and a bass, with Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli on violin and guitar. There's some very captivating music here. The recording spanned the years 1934 to 37. The tracks are basically renditions of jazz classics like Lady Be Good and Swanee River, and are covered with Reinhardt's typical style, rhythmic and swinging with long drawn violin passages in between. There's also Jerry Mengo on vocals on 3 tracks. The second half of the album is taken from 1934 through 1940 and sees Reinhardt performing alongside his original quintet and other musicians. In these performances, we get a glimpse of some great originals by Reinhardt like Swing 41 and Nuages. There's also some great solo performances as well as performances alongside larger ensembles. So this album is a great cross-section of his best works in different settings throughout his career. Keep Cool, Guitar Solos 1950-53 is another great album. Towards the last years of his career, Django Reinhardt switched from his typical swing style to a more bebop oriented approach. So he assembled a quintet featuring piano, drums, bass, trumpets and saxophones. Also he'd switched from acoustic to electric guitar. The switch gave his music a crispier, edgier sound. So most of the tracks here included his own compositions and have a touch of bebop in them. There's choppy chords and dizzying arpeggios in the tracks. Songs like Dream of You, Impromptu, Vamp, Keep Cool and more. So that was some insight into more of Django Reinhardt's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Django Reinhardt, his life and times and best hits. And now it's time for some trending album news. So Yoyoka is an up-and-coming jazz drumming sensation. She just celebrated her 15th birthday with a new album release called 14. Yoyoka hails from Japan and started playing music at an early age. At the age of just 8, she stunned the world with a beautiful cover of a Led Zeppelin classic Good Times Bad Times. The cover led to guest interviews on the Ellen DeGeneres Show and more. Several musicians around the world have felicitated her for her music. Critics have called her one of the world's top 500 drummers. So 14 is a debut album release and it features her own songwriting and compositions. The album contains 14 tracks spanning rock, pop, jazz and fusion and highlights her skills as a drummer, musician and composer. She plays bass and guitar on the songs Home Bestie and is on vocals on the song Keychain. Also in this album she collaborates with world-class musicians and producers like Michael Walden, Derek Sherinian and more. For more information please visit yoyoka.jp. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Django Reinhardt's best compositions of all time. Stay tuned.